chance for any of the wind and or airplane sounds. But this is going to be the part 2 to the Pohl Force November 1 outdoor knife review. Put this into 2 different parts is because this is kind of, the testing part was pretty lengthy, so I just decided to break that into its own part. So anyways, this is going to be the tabletop part of it, and first part I'm going to be talking about is the ergonomics of this knife are really, really awesome. It's really comfortable, and the weight, to start off, is it's kind of almost weird that it's a good kind of heavy. To say that, it's a little weird, because generally you don't like heavy, but I really like how this knife, it feels like you're holding something as far as the weight goes. It actually feels like there's something in your hand, you're really holding something, but yet it doesn't feel large or cumbersome. It still feels very agile. So, and that's also with multiple different styles of holding it, whether it be like this, or reverse, or just any style of handling it. It just handles really, really well. And so that's something that I really like about the hand. Traction goes, the traction is also something else that I really like. As I first mentioned in the first impressions, I like where they put the jimping on this knife. It's right in a spot where if you do need to actually stab something with it, you can lock in very well. But for the most of your work, you'll be choked up, or most of your bushcraft work, you'll be choked up. And here, it's nicely rounded, and there's no hot spots. These edges here aren't too bad. Nothing really digs into your skin, and overall, it's really comfortable to hold it like this for a long period of time. It's also really nice. Here by the tang, anywhere where the tang is, it's very, very rounded and extremely comfortable in holding it. It feels really rounded, and you can really feel that by the fact that there's really no irritation, and that can be a very uncomfortable spot on a lot of knives, is the tang to handle meat, but it's very well done here. And even on this hump, even when you're choked up and a finger is on this hump, it really, just because it's so rounded, it doesn't really feel that bad. Also with traction though, this G10 is very well sculpted, so that when you grab it, and you actually grab it, you really get locked in, even in this grip, not even without having to use the jimping. It just locks in your hand really, really well. So now onto the blade. So start off with the blade. It's made out of Nylox, and of course this is a new steel for me. I was unsure the performance on this steel, but it performs almost identically, at least as far as I can tell, to D2 as far as rust resistance and edge retention, and that's a very good thing. D2 is a steel that I run a bit of, and I really do like it. This being said, it definitely will still rust on you, especially this kind of stone-washed satin finish. Of course, the survival version, which is their blacked out version, won't rust as much, and that just has a coating on the most of the blade, and so that one won't rust as easily. But this one, being the outdoor knife, having the satin finish, as you can see, it does rust, and I've had this knife develop slight surface rust when I've been using it out in the field. So definitely watch it and keep some kind of oil or fat on it to keep it from rusting. As far as the edge retention goes, it's, like I said, D2. It's really good. It came with a factory edge that was very, very sharp. I really did like the factory edge. I still have the factory edge on it, just because the edge retention is so good that I really haven't had to maintain the knife that much through all the use that I've put on it. Kind of one of the things that I don't like about this knife, and it's nothing really that this knife could fix per se, it's just more or less a personal preference that I don't like, and that is that this is a spear point blade primarily. It kind of looks, if you just look at the blade, it almost looks drop point, but the way the handle kind of is, and how the handle's kind of more upswept than on a traditional knife or traditionally styled knife, really makes this, when you start bearing down on the tip, pretty much makes it a spear point. And if you guys have noticed, the knives I've reviewed, you'll notice that generally I do like drop points, and that's because for what I do in bushcrafting, which is primarily doing more levering with the tips, it tends to work better. The drop point tends to work better than a spear point. There also tends to be less edge or less metal essentially behind the tip. So that's kind of, and I did notice that. It's not a deal breaker for certain, and of course other bushcrafters that like to do things like make bow drills, this did a very good job at making the bow drill, and that's definitely something that the spear point is really good at. Cutting tip, it kind of is not as good at cutting on the very tip. I want to talk about quickly the tip strength of it. Of course, there is a swedge, unsharpened swedge, and it does run. There are runners that run down to the tip, and this is a very strong knife on the tip. I did quite a bit of prying with it, and at no point did I really feel it was going to break. So that was something I did like, although, like I mentioned previously, because there's so much material behind the one small complaint that I would say, and it's nothing horrible on these Kydex sheaths. Of course, I don't know what the leather ones really look like. I mean, generally I do, but I've never handled one of the leather sheaths for the November one. But I will say on the Kydex sheaths, I wish they would have put some kind of ramping system here to help ramp off, to help push off, and that'd be especially useful for if you wanted to run it on your belt, because on your belt it can be a lot harder to just rip the knife out. Unlike on my neck, it's pretty easy for me to just yank the knife out. As you can see, it's set up to be a down draw, so I can yank this thing out pretty good. But for people who want to run this on the belt, it might be a little bit harder to do because there's no ramp off here. So that would be one recommendation, is to kind of make something. You guys have something down here that would be really good to put up here. Basically it for the knife. It's a really great performer. Like I said, for the cost, it's a great knife. If you want something that just doesn't really look like everyone else's bushcrafting knife, you know, the traditional kind of leather sheaths or leather Kydex with the canvas handles, or, you know, if you want something that looks a lot more modern, kind of tactical, but still very functional for bushcrafting, I definitely recommend this knife. It has really great tip strength, probably the best tip strength of any of the knives I've ever tested for bushcrafting. It of course is more tactically set up and more tactically inclined. If you wanted to go, and if you had to defend yourself with it, it'd do fabulous. I can almost guarantee that. Almost, I've never tested it, so I don't fully know, but I'm pretty sure it would. And just overall, performance has just been excellent, whether it be skinning game or making crafts. It just does it all really well. Of course, I don't think I ever mentioned this, but batoning. I didn't really do a whole lot of batoning because the knife is kind of small. It only has a 4-inch from the very tip here, or the very edge of the handle, to the very tip is 4 inches. So it's not terribly in many videos. The smaller size is my preference for knives. I don't like huge knives. That being said, it still is stout enough that if you wanted to, or if you had to baton with it at all, obviously this knife could easily take on batoning. I wouldn't question it at all, although I didn't do that much batoning with it, just because I don't really generally do batoning that much with knives, because axes are far more efficient. And anyways, that's pretty much all I have to say about this knife, and I'm out.